I think it's really important to know, right, that constant chatter, it's called the default mode network. So neurologically speaking, the default in our brain is this chattering, constant stream of thought. Unless you do a lot of work in the mindfulness area to kind of quiet that. Otherwise, that's the default. So that means that we're all running around with this constant stream, this constant narrative in our minds.
You're listening to episode 187 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Building Psychological Strength podcast. My name is April and I'm your host. And this week we are tackling one of the most foundational concepts in psychological strength, like ever. It is so foundational that you would have a hard time finding a situation in life that this doesn't impact. And it's one of those things that gets really misunderstood and can seem sort of opaque and confusing unless you're led through the jungle in the way that I'm hoping we're going to do with this episode. So I'm excited to welcome back Ashley for us to unpack a very awesome topic.
Hey, I'm happy to be here and excited to talk about the committee in your mind. It is such an important thing, and I am consistently, I shouldn't be surprised anymore, but when I start to talk about these concepts with people, and it's things that, you and I have been studying for a billion years now, and it's just such a fundamental part of my worldview and understanding of, life and how things work, that I'm surprised that it's new for a lot of people. And I think that's a shame, because it can be really impactful and really transformative to have this knowledge and to have this understanding. So I'm super excited to talk about this today.
I love it. Let's start with 3 quick example scenarios. So if you're listening to this, I want you to just imagine, even if you're driving, you can imagine this isn't going to be any kind of guided meditation or anything like that. This is just going to be a few examples that I want you to imagine happen to you. And as you're imagining them, just kind of pay attention to where your mind goes. What assumptions do you make? What thoughts do you have? What feelings do you have? If you were to be in these situations, what would your sort of holistic response be? So first situation, imagine it is the weekend and you're going along, you're doing your normal weekend things, and out of the blue, you get a text message from a friend that you haven't spoken to in a long time. And this message says, "I can't believe this is happening. We need to talk."
I want to gasp right there, right?
I know, right? So if you're listening to this, just pay attention, like, where does your mind go? What would you assume? What's the first thing that would come to mind, and how would you feel? Okay, second one. Imagine that you're at work and you're giving a presentation, and afterward, your boss comes up to you and says, "Stop by my office later. Let's talk about how that went."
Again, gasp, right? Stomach drop.
Right? Oh, I know. So again, folks listening to this, what would your assumptions be? Thoughts, feelings, all of that. And then one more. You imagine you promised your significant other that you're going to spend the evening with them. And things have been really busy. you haven't had a ton of time together recently. So this is a big, important evening that you're going to spend together. And you make plans to meet at a certain restaurant at 4 p.m. This is back when we got to go to restaurants. So just like use your imagination at 4 p.m. And as you get back to your day, you kind of lose track of time. Like things get really busy, you get caught up in it, and you get a text at 4:45 that says, "Where are you?" And you instantly realized you've forgotten and lost track of time. Where does your mind go?
Mm-hmm.
So these situations, what I want you to pay attention to is, especially in the first two, they're very open-ended and they're very translucent as to whether the situation is good or bad or what might have happened. And our minds immediately sort of jump in and they try to fill in gaps and they try to help us predict and they try to reason through all these different scenarios to help make sense of an ambiguous situation. And that's what we want to talk about today, is this chatter that we've all just been exposed to right now that happens in situations like these. But if you're really quiet and you pay attention, it is a near constant experience throughout our lives that we just have this chatter in our mind that is this running inner monologue. And that's what we want to talk about today.
Right. And I think it's really important to know, right, that constant chatter, it's called the default mode network. So neurologically speaking, the default in our brain is this chattering, constant stream of thought, unless you do a lot of work in the mindfulness area to kind of quiet that. Otherwise, that's the default. So that means that we're all running around with this constant stream, this constant narrative in our minds. And sometimes it's helpful, right? And sometimes it's not. Like in that example, what if your boss wanted to say, "You killed it. That was the best presentation you've ever done." But for how many people, how many of you, was that your automatic thought? Was that what your mind threw out as the first connect the dots, fill in the blank prediction? I'm guessing not a ton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so what we want to do today, Ashley introduced this topic, right? The committee in your mind. It can be really difficult to get a handle on this chatter. And we can talk but even before we dive into these committee members that we're going to talk about today, why it's important to get a handle on that chatter. But we're actually going to do a two-parter on this because there's a set of committee members that we're going to talk about today, a set of voices that are very common that most of us hear to some degree. Some of them are louder than others, but most of us hear this set of voices in our lives that just, they have a constant opinion about everything. It is a constant amount of chatter in our mind. And we want to talk about those today. And then in part 2 next week, we're going to talk about a set of committee members that are less involuntary. They are more under our control. They tend to need to be invited to the table, but they're much more deliberate. And in a lot of cases, a heck of a lot more helpful for us. So we're going to focus today on committee members that are typically uninvited. They show up, they give their opinion. It's usually loud. It's not typically very helpful for us. And we'll dive into this set of voices that we have named specifically because it helps you recognize them when you hear them in your own mind. It helps you get better at recognizing it and creating some space between those voices and yourself and who you are at your core.
Mm-hmm. So if I can throw in a little bit here just to even set up the committee and where we're coming from with this, is that a lot of times we think of that all of the thoughts going through our mind are coming from us, right? Especially if you're the kind of person who thinks in I language. I need to do this. I'm doing that. I'm such a fill in the blank. Sometimes people think more in you terms, so that already feels a little bit more like an external voice talking to you. Either way, and when we're talking about this, we're not talking about voices in the classic hearing voices, psychotic symptom kind of way. We're talking about being a human with a mind and these internal voices that kick in. So I want to start by saying there's you, and you are a human with a mind. And your mind is the thing that is constantly chattering at you, and being able to recognize that for what it is, which is just that default mode network, just that mental chatter, can be very, very helpful. Mm-hmm. And some people, when they talk about this, if you're into psychology, you may see things like distortions, thinking errors, distorted thinking, brain tricks, logical fallacies, a lot of these kinds of things. I like to think of them as glitches and brain tricks. But we also want to be thinking about, what are these voices saying? What is my mind saying to me? And if you notice, there's all kinds of contradictory voices inside, right? Sometimes it's the, oh, you should get up and go work out, and the, no, just play around and watch TV. So that's where April and I came up with this framework of the committee in your mind. Is I picture, and you can let me know what you think, April, but it's almost like a boardroom, and there's me, and then there's this whole table full of committee members, and they just barged in, showed up. I walked into it, and this is what I think I've got, right? Like, these are the people who are telling me what to do, telling me about situations, advising me, so to speak, on what to do and how to feel about things. And to your point of the ones we're going to talk about today, these are the ones that showed up automatically. They were just kind of there. They come from our subconscious, and we may have talked about that in other episodes. I can certainly get into it, but suffice it to say, they just show up, as opposed to the ones we're going to talk about next week, which are the ones we have to invite. Say, could you please come? Here's your seat at the table. I need to hear from you too. So, all right.
Awesome. So let's dive in. We'll start with probably the committee member that most of us are most familiar with. This committee member is our inner critic. This committee member is punitive. It is the committee member that tells you, I can't believe you did that. You're a terrible person. If you went into sort of a negative place in that third scenario where, you missed, you were late to meet your significant other, you're so stupid. I can't believe you did that. You just met your inner critic. And so many of us have a very loud inner critic.
Right? And I think sometimes too, the critic can be really harsh, like you're talking about. And sometimes I think of it more like the frenemy, like the mean girls of our mind. That's like, you really shouldn't do it that way. You should do it like this. Or, oh, I mean, that was pretty good, but you totally missed this little part over here. So it almost sounds like it's trying to be helpful, but really it's kind of tearing you down.
Yeah.
The outcome there, right? Like, you don't feel good enough. You feel guilty or insecure or like failure or anxious. And that critic, oh, it's just vapid. And, and sneaky. It gets in there all the time, and it's so woven into everything.
Totally. And this is a good one to work with because it is so familiar to us and because it gets talked about so much, like people's inner critic. It's a good one to talk about in the sense that the inner critic is not you. That is not your voice. You aren't choosing to say those things to yourself. Those are, and as Ashley mentioned, there's a lot of brain glitches and brain tricks and habits, that our mind gets into that let's go a little bit brain science and dive back into the committee. Yeah. One of the reasons why these things happen is because our mind only has so much capacity to just process information.
Right.
So one of our biggest tools at our disposal, and this is a helpful thing most of the time, is whatever thoughts we're having, whatever like reasoning or decisions or whatever that we have to make on a regular basis, our mind works really hard to figure out what those are and then automate them. as much as possible. Like move them from being something that is very deliberate and takes a lot of energy to do, and move it below the surface of the water in our iceberg example that we give all the time. Like get it out of your conscious awareness, make it involuntary, and make it easy. And what happens is, and we'll do a whole episode on the pros and cons or the good and bad side of neuroplasticity sometime in the future, but this is a little bit hinting at that. Your mind will learn how to automate amazing things, like great things, like helping you get from your house to your job without having to think that hard about it. That's awesome, right? That's such a great hack. But it will also automate really unhelpful things, like telling yourself you are a stupid jerk if you spill your coffee. Like, big deal. You made a mistake. So one thing that I love to tell people about the inner critic is that if you listen to its voice and you ask yourself, would you, Ashley, or you, Stacy, or whoever's listening to this, would you ever say something like that, using those words in that tone, to your best friend or to a small child?
Right.
If you would never do that, it's not you, it's your inner critic.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, hate that.
I know. Well, and then I think too, if we, all right, because I love the brain science piece, but we have a negativity bias, right? We are more likely to see the negative stuff. Our minds are natural problem solvers. That's what they do. I have a problem, solve it. So when you put those two things together, then you've got this little part of your mind that's always looking for what's wrong, what's bad, what could be better. And when you throw that in, then it can become the filter through which we're judging ourselves. And that critic never is satisfied. The critic never says, good job.
Yeah.
It never says, you got this. That was great. So the critic is just there to criticize.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to I love that you hit negativity bias, because there are 3 committee members that we can throw in here that really, think about this as like these committee members, not only do they all kind of coexist in there, but they can gang up on you in certain circumstances and sort of like play off of each other. So the 3 I'm going to bring up are the persecutor, the Debbie Downer, and the judge. So the persecutor is like, in the same way that your inner critic is telling you how terrible you are and pointing out all your mistakes, the persecutor is doing that for everyone else. So it's saying that person's an idiot and this person shouldn't have done that. Similarly, the Debbie Downer, this is your inner voice of negativity. This is like hardcore, the voice that's saying like, oh, it's a beautiful day out today, but.
It's
right?
Oh,
it's that.
You just won the lottery. Yeah, but I'm going to have to pay taxes on that money.
I know, right?
And it's natural because we're kind of wired that way. But if that committee member is strong for you, either because of wiring and genetics or early learning, either way, it becomes habitual, right? The more we listen to these committee members, the louder they get, the more control they take. So,
And the third one that really plays off that negativity bias is the judge. So this is handing down verdicts, deciding whether things or people or situations or actions are good or bad. You can imagine where perfectionism shows up. Like imagine the judge teams up with the inner critic to really bring you down. So the judge, decides that, what you did wasn't perfect and it wasn't good enough. And it signals the inner critic to just start harping on you and telling you how bad of a person you are. And this vicious cycle of repetition begins. So the inner critic, the persecutor, the Debbie Downer, and the judge, oh my gosh, this cycle of negativity that those committee members can cause.
Right. And look what happens, right? If they're there and they're really loud, they're going to pull for a lot of negative feelings for you, right? It's going to be anger, if we're talking persecutor. It's going to be anxiety or guilt or shame or sadness, depending on which one or ones it is. And how's that going to influence our actions, right? And the twisted part is, again, the more we listen to them, the more we let them boss us around and tell us what to do or dictate our actions, the more automatic it becomes, which means the more loud, the stronger they get.
Yeah.
So that's why this is so important, right? Like imagine, you just see if we had like the critic and the judge and the persecutor and Debbie Downer all just screaming at you constantly all day long, what life feels like then.
Yeah. And we all go through different seasons where
For sure.
these committee members are louder and are a little bit more quiet. But imagine if you've ever been in a situation where the stakes are really high and you just didn't do as well as you expected. These voices get loud fast. And to Ashley's point, it can constrain your behavior. And something that you've mentioned a number of times, Ashley, is the role that our resulting behavior plays in being a feedback loop and strengthening the entire system. It's like feeding the dog that's barking at you.
Absolutely.
The dog gets mad and angry and yells and screams and barks at you. And so you give it a treat and it does that next time. It just enhances the whole system.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people all the time, like, thought, you can't control the thoughts, right? Like, especially these committee members, they come up uninvited, unintentionally, coming from your subconscious. They just show up. But thought plus action equals more thought. If you have a thought and you act on it, you are telling your brain, nice, that was helpful, keep sending it.
And is that really what you consciously would want to say to your inner critic? Awesome. Keep telling me I'm stupid. I'm having a really great time.
I found that so helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Debbie Downer. I really like when you kind of rain on everybody's parade.
Right?
Keep it up. Yeah.
So now I want to talk to the type A's in the crowd, because there are a couple of committee members that are likely especially loud for you. These two committee members are the taskmaster. This taskmaster is the person who, or the voice that praises you for being busy, tells you that you can get that done. You can do more than one person's amount of stuff in a day. You can and you should say yes and take it on. So that is one committee member. The other one, who very frequently teams up with this committee member, is the logistics person. Not only can you get it done, but let me plan and plan and plan and organize and try to jam all of it into your schedule and figure out a way to make it work to where you are multitasking. You look like these crazy octopus people with like 10 different things, 8 different things in your hand. Octopuses have 8 arms, 8 different things in your hands, and you're trying to do them all at the same time. So the taskmaster and the logistics person, they set you up to have too much on your plate.
So, and the thing is with these two, these don't always stand out as problematic as quickly or readily as the first 4 that we talked about, because they can seem helpful, right? This is how I get everything done. Or I've got a lot of plates in the air, balls in the air that I'm juggling, so I got to keep doing it. But I want to hit a couple of problems. One, if that taskmaster is super loud, what happens when you sit down? You should be being productive. You're not being productive. You need to be doing stuff. And what happens when humans are try to be productive 24/7? It's not good stuff, right? Adults need to play just as much as kids, maybe not as much as kids do, but play is as critical for the health and well-being of adults as it is for kids. We need downtime. We like to talk about, your body, think of it like your cell phone battery. It has to recharge at some point. You have to recharge at some point. And that's when that taskmaster crosses into no thank you territory, is when it's like, you shouldn't be sitting down. You can't take a breather. You've got 98,000 things to do. And the logistics person, again, helpful if you need to plan and organize. If you've got a lot going on, that can be a really great skill. When it's constant, though, you get this cognitive load, this mental load, the never-ending running to-do list, planning, predicting, planning, organizing, solving. And that also takes you out of the moment. Like, what happens when you're trying to play with your kids, but the logistics person's in charge?
Yeah. I really resonate with these two. You and I have had a number of conversations about this. I have a very loud taskmaster. I have a very loud logistics person. And the reason why we named all of these, right? These are not like evidence-based psychological concepts we're talking about here. We're talking about anthropomorphizing or like turning into like a human being, things that are not human. But we do it because it becomes a lot easier. For example, when you have a busy day and you desperately, you need to work out, you need to work out, you would feel so much better. Self-care, we've talked about the self-care pyramid. Go back and listen to that episode. And, it's more than bubble baths and manicures. It is things that support you at your best. You need to work out to be at your best. And your logistics person kicks in and says, yeah, but you have all these important things that you need to get done. You have to get this done. So schedule your workout at the end of the day. And if you have time, you will get to it. And here's what's cool about this. The more you not only get to know the names of these committee members, which we'll throw them below in the episode description, so you have like a list to go back to, and we'll put them in the show notes on this episode's link on our website, so you can go back to them as well. The more you get to know these voices, the faster you can recognize them for what they are. I literally thought the logistics person was me for the longest time. And recently, even within the last few weeks, I started, and we'll get into this toward the end of the episode, but I started running experiments against the logistics person. The logistics person would say, you can't work out to the end of the day. You're not going to get your stuff done. And I was like, watch me. And so I would work out at 9 a.m., which still makes my skin crawl. Like, oh my God, that is the first thing I'm doing for the day. And I'm making all of these other big priorities fall as they may toward the end of the day. And you know what? That logistics person is a liar, because somehow it all got done. And I worked out at a time that was not when I was supposed to. So you can start to notice them and then like poke at them a little bit and just like see if what they're saying is really true. And that's why we're giving them these names, because we want you to be able to notice them.
Absolutely. And from an anxiety standpoint, we've got the worrier, right? The what if, right? Our brains have this built-in threat detection system, and some people's is really, really, really good at its job. The worrier is the committee member who's sitting there like, oh no, actually, what if this happens? And 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 it's never the good stuff. Never, what if it all works out really well? No, it's looking for the potential dangers. And that can be problematic. And the thing is, you can't always argue with the worrier. Well, no, it's not going to happen, because how the heck do you know? I mean, unless you're psychic, you can't predict the future. The worrier certainly thinks it can. And it always predicts negative things, bad things happening. But to April, to your point, I've trained myself, because I've worked with anxiety for so many years, and I start preaching from day one, what if is a worry? What if is a worry? So when that comes into my mind, which it doesn't very often anymore, and I wasn't naturally not anxious. Like I was naturally very much prone to worry and to the people pleaser we'll talk about. But when you do that long enough, it's what if is a worry? Nope, that's the worrier. That's the worrier. And I'm putting my hand out to the side, like talk to the hand right now, because I don't even want to engage it. I don't even want to get tangled up with it. I want to say that's a worrier. And I love that idea of experiments or defying the committee as a way to kind of shut them down.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that a little bit toward the end of this episode, some practical things. This is a little bit life designy, but some practical things we can do. I love that you brought up the people pleaser because, or the worrier, sorry, because that immediate jump from A to Z and trying to predict what's going to happen. Again, think about how these committee members team up on you. Right? So the worrier can get involved with the logistics person and the taskmaster. They can get involved with the judge. They can literally be one of the reasons why the judge thinks they're right about their evaluation. This like conglomeration of these voices can really put you in a position where your behavior is very impacted and your just emotional state is constantly tangled up in them. That, by the way, is what a lot of like Stoics and Zen people and whatever, when they say that the human being is prone to constant quote unquote suffering, this is what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
Being too fused with your thoughts to where you don't have any sort of clear ability to be mindful in the moment anymore. You're just completely wrapped up in whatever emotional levers these, crazy voices are telling you to go in.
Right. Let me go back to those examples that we started with, right? So you missed you're late for your date.
Yeah.
And then, okay, So the situation, just the facts are, it is 4:45. I am not at the restaurant. That's it, right? But none of us are going to sit there and say, well, it's 4:45. I'm not there. Let me figure out how to proceed. It's going to jump to this. Oh my gosh. And my date is going to be really mad and he's going to think this, or I'm a terrible person. Like, it could go a number of ways, but think about all of that. So pain is inevitable, right? Oops, it's 4:45. I'm not there. That's painful. Sure. Suffering is optional. Suffering is all of that extra. That's all of the spin from the committee, all of that heartache from the committee.
I love that. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. That is
I think
so
that's like an old
good.
Buddhist quote or something. I certainly can't take credit for it, but that's what, I love this saying, just because life gives you a cactus doesn't mean you have to sit on it. And that's kind of the same thing is, all right, but this is why we're prone to suffering, is because we are humans with minds that do what minds do. And the default is this committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mentioned really briefly the people pleaser. People pleaser.
Big one.
How big of a teammate to the worrier? How big of a teammate to the taskmaster and the logistics person? The critic. Talk about a gross team up when the people pleaser gets in there. So not only do you have to bend over backwards to get all of this stuff done, but you absolutely have to do it for other people to like you. And the thing is, Ashley, to your earlier point about the logistics person and the taskmaster, there's some good at heart here, right? Like, it feels good to be validated by other people. It feels good to know that we've done something nice for other people, but it crosses a line when we are so caught up in what other people think and so caught up in trying to win approval at the expense of everything else.
Right. And that's where that people pleaser comes in, is that you need to do this or they're going to get mad at you. They'll be disappointed. You're going to let them down. They won't like you. You're going to burden them. All of these things. And it can almost feel like it comes from a good place. But the problem is then we end up sacrificing ourselves, right? Like when we've talked in a past episode about boundaries, people pleaser is a big reason why setting boundaries is difficult for some people. Mm-hmm. People pleaser is a big reason why we have a hard time just being ourselves in certain situations, saying what we really think or expressing how we really feel or what we really want or need, because that little voice is kicking in. How are they going to think about it? What's their reaction going to be? It's probably going to be a bad one.
Yeah. This makes me think of, I mention it a lot on the podcast, but that blog post by Bronnie Ware, The Regrets of the Dying. And one of the 5 biggest regrets that people have at the end of their life is not living as authentically who they are.
Yeah.
And the people pleaser, but and I want you, if you're listening to this, to really go there with your brain, like with your mind. You're at the end of your life. Your biggest regret is that you didn't live authentically as the person who you are. And the voice that is very likely responsible for that is the people pleaser. Talk about ramifications for not getting a handle on this committee. That is like the ultimate pain right there, is that you've run out of time. You don't have time to get any of it back. And you spent your whole life trying to do what everyone else wanted you to do. And now you regret it. That rips my heart out.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I jump ahead too to you were saying experimenting with defying the committee, right? Like, really? We need to look at, is it helpful? Is it accurate? Most people kind of assume if they're thinking it, there must be a reason for it, right? These thoughts are meaningful. They're either accurate, factually true, or they're helpful in some way. And that's frankly just not the case. It's just a mental habit. Just a mental habit. It's like a mental hiccup in a lot of cases that then we keep feeding and they come back.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Forgot where I was going with that. So to experiment with it, right? The people pleasing one, that's a good place to experiment. And I can say this as a teen and young adult, I was very socially anxious. That means I was really anxious in social situations and very afraid of judgment. My people pleaser was very, very loud. It's not anymore. But I've also done a lot of these experiments where you kind of test it out. This person's going to get mad if I say no. Let me say no and see what happens. If I do something weird, people aren't going to like me. Well, let me do something weird and see what happens. And there are a couple really great TED Talks that illustrate that we can link up on the show notes too. That if you're interested in this, or your people pleaser is very loud and you want to start to shift that, they'll be really great resources for you.
I love it. So 2 more committee members. And again, these guys go together. The martyr and the victim. Oh man. And as a mom, I can say these 2 are also very loud. They were not loud until I had kids, and they got loud. And so I've had to do a lot of work identifying when the martyr is showing up, identifying when the victim is showing up, and again, disobeying and moving against the grain. But the martyr, this is the committee member who, it kicks in and reminds you how disappointed everybody's going to be if you don't follow through, how guilty you're going to feel if you say no. And it puts the weight of the world on you and tells you that things are going to fall apart if you don't do them.
That's the piece that I always think of, like with the martyr, right? If it's I'm the only one who can do this, or I have to do this. And unfortunately, it does seem like that falls on moms a lot. So there's something about that, being in that situation or that circumstance where you are responsible for so many people, that then that martyr just shows right on up and then takes it too far. And we're not saying don't care, right? Or when we talk about experimenting or defying the committee, it's not saying I'm washing my hands of these little people I gave birth to or
there are some days,
raising. Yeah, you can want to do that. That's totally fine. But it is looking at, okay, the martyr leads to overfunctioning.
Yeah.
Right. And what's the cost of overfunctioning? Is your health, happiness, and well-being. And sometimes the other people around you might surprise you and step up if you're willing to give them a chance. And the martyr won't. Martyr says, it's all you.
I have a theory on this around motherhood in particular. And let's put some context around this. I have very young kids. So I have a 4.5-year-old and I have a 2-year-old. So if you are a parent of teens, you may not resonate with this, but this is one of the thought experiments I've had. We know psychologically that, and we mentioned it in this episode already, we're really good at developing involuntary habits. That's the only way we get through the day. I mean, imagine if you had to work really hard to think about what you were supposed to do next when you take a shower. 9 times out of 10, you follow the same path when you take a shower. It's very involuntary. And it actually feels weird to do things differently. And that's where this gets important. At the beginning, when you have a baby in the United States, typically the woman who had the baby, and here we're going to be talking about heterosexual couples, having kids, not through adoption. And I don't know what the leave policies are for adoption. I feel like some companies do it similarly.
I think so.
But maternity leave, I think, sets up a lot of women to develop a strong martyr, because in the beginning, you're the one who's there the whole time. So think about what your mind does. It's really good at, the baby cries, it's me. The baby cries, it's me. The baby cries, it's me. The thing needs to be done, it's me. Hungry, me, dirty, me, because it is in the beginning. And you do that for a number of weeks, and our adaptive little mind immediately decides that it is you. And here comes the martyr and decides that you will make this your responsibility from now on. Now, I have another theory about this. My youngest child just turned 2. And when a kid gets to be 2, there are quite a few things they can do for themselves, and they can understand you, and they can pick something up themselves, and they can be across the room for you for a little while, and they're probably going to be fine. And there's a lot of change that happens in a short amount of time. Without some intentionality, it can be very easy at this stage to allow the martyr to continue. when you're past the point where it quote unquote needs to be you that does it. And this is again where we're talking about so many of these committee members come from an adaptive place, but then they take it too far, and we never check them. We never question them. We just let them deeply root themselves in our cognition and in our behavior. So I know for me, it took intentional work for me, like the baby, like I still do this. My oldest daughter will come and say, Mom, can I have a glass of water? And my husband has caught on now. He'll literally physically move in between us and say, my name's not Mom, my name's Dad. And it's a signal to me and it's a signal to her, no, we're not doing this anymore. But it's that kind of disobey. You have to be able to recognize the voice before you can do it. And that's why it was helpful for me. Like, you're being a martyr. You don't have to do this right now. Somebody else can do it.
Well, and it's such a good point, because as you were talking, what I was thinking is, and this is where psychological strength is so important, is 100%. Because you have to know this, right? I remember having a conversation with my brother about a year and a half ago, and kind of along these lines, and me just saying like, dude, your mind's being a jerk. And it was like a light bulb moment. And he's a bright kid. He's very psychologically savvy. He's, so I was surprised that he was so surprised, and he was like, I never thought of it that way. I just thought if I had the thought, it must be real and I got to go along with it. Never knew that you don't have to do what your mind tells you. And that's what I'm thinking with this, right? As you're talking about motherhood, I think, and it extends well beyond the 2 to 4 years, right? There are high schoolers and young adults who Mom's still doing a whole lot for. And it makes sense to kind of see where this come from. And it's not a blame, like not coming from a place of blame, but more of understanding of course, I
get where it comes from.
Absolutely. And yet we get to change it.
And that's so much about, I know we're kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but I think it's an important one. That's so much about what we teach is so much of the yuck that we encounter psychologically, again, it comes from an understandable place. And you could look at, I'm just going to say, like that woman who has the high school age kid, or that person who is still in the relationship that they have wanted out of, or that person who is still talking about, and we'll hit another committee member that's really relevant here, but still talking about the job that they hate and not doing anything to change it. That person, like you can look at that person who's 10 miles down the road of reinforcing this committee member or these committee members and kind of judge them. But if you back the truck up, you can start to see the seeds that were planted. They're totally understandable.
Yeah. Well, that's where so many problems come from, like from a psychological standpoint, anxiety, depression, problem relationships. It's minds doing what minds do, and people reacting the way you would very naturally and not knowing any better, not knowing how it works. It would be like, okay, if you ate a bag of potato chips, they taste delicious. Our brains will crave fatty, high-calorie foods. And if you didn't know, potato chips are actually bad for you health-wise, and potato chips don't offer nutritional value. Left to your own devices with the human brain, you would eat nothing but potato chips. But we don't do that because we know differently. And it's kind of the same thing. And I think that I won't hop on the soapbox, but of why we need to be looking at psychological strength. And why it's so important is this is information, and these are tools that we all need. So we're not just eating mental potato chips all the time. So should we hit on this?
Last committee member, is the victim. And I mentioned the example of the person who is in the job and they are still complaining about it and aren't taking any steps to make any real change. The victim is interesting because from a life design perspective, we'll do an episode again coming up here on the 5 principles of life design, but one of them is radical responsibility. You're going to take 100% responsibility for 100% of the situations you're in. You're not at fault. You're not to blame. But looking ahead, what are you going to do? What's your next step going to be? And that's where life design starts is, okay, I've decided I'm going to take responsibility for this. What is my next step? And the victim gets loud. The victim gets loud and convinces you don't have any control. It's something outside of you. There's nothing you can do. It's okay. Poor you. And man, does that feel good in situations where we know there's an action we can take that's actually really difficult to take.
Right.
We're looking for someone to tell us it's okay, you don't have to take it. And man, that victim will be first in line to tell you.
Absolutely. You can't do it because, and what's the effect? You get stuck.
You make no progress.
No progress. You get stuck in misery and you feel powerless. Yeah. So it's not helping you out. None of these committee members really, I think most of them, if left to their own devices, are going to end up crossing into that unhelpful territory.
Oh,
there's going to be
absolutely.
effects. And I don't want to necessarily say like they're bad, because I also think they're just natural, but let's look at it. They're not helpful. And if it's not helpful, you don't have to listen to it. You don't have to act on it. That's what we've been talking kind of all throughout about. Defy the committee members. That's how, I mean, think of it like standing up to a bully almost. This is how I teach kids when it comes to the worrier of, all right, well, that's the brain bully. You got to boss it back. And sometimes we're going to do it with our words. No, thank you. Or that's not helpful. And sometimes you're going to let it just chatter at you or yell at you as you do your own thing. And that's how you show it. Oh, you're not in charge anymore. And that's important to know too, because a lot of people think I have to get rid of these thoughts. I have to silence these voices or remove them from the committee. And that's generally not possible. Thoughts are there and there's no delete button in our mind. So those thoughts may always be there. Now we can quiet them. And this defying them is one tool for doing that. We talk about a lot more of the details and how to really quiet or weaken these committee members in our Ascend program. So if you're interested, by all means, check that out. But know that just because you're having a thought doesn't mean you have to act on it. And I guarantee you've got examples from your own life that you can draw from this. Like, how many times have you sat in a meeting and thought, oh, this is stupid, I just want to leave. And yet you sat there and diligently took notes. Or you had the thought, I don't want to go to work today. And yet you got out of bed and did it. We do it all the time. We're just talking about getting really intentional about it.
Yeah. I want to run through the names of these committee members one more time, and then we can talk a little bit about experimentation and defiance before we close out this episode. So committee members are the inner critic, the persecutor, the Debbie Downer, the judge, the taskmaster, the logistics person, the martyr, the victim, the people pleaser, and the worrier. So like I said, I'll put a list of these in the show notes and on the episode description. So if you're looking on, for example, iTunes, you should be able to just swipe up and be able to see this list of committee members. We want you to get really good at recognizing them in your day-to-day life. Just pay attention to times where you're feeling like anything but calm and confident and happy and whatever, any sort of like emotions. Typically one or more of them is squawking in your ear. Get really good at recognizing them and then figure out, and this is where the experimentation piece comes in. I'm not asking you to do anything like hugely major, but what I'm asking you to think about is, what is the smallest action you could take in order to test if what they're saying actually holds water, is actually factual? Imagine like you're walking out onto a ledge, and you know what? I think they have one in Vegas where it's this ledge that's super high up, but it's glass, and you have to walk out onto this clear glass. Most people wouldn't like charge out onto the glass. They'll sort of like poke their toe at it first and make sure that it's sound. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an experiment the size of sort of poking at the ledge to make sure that it's sound before you start adding to it and doing bigger and bigger experiments. So my logistics person that I'm experimenting with right now, I've run a number of experiments on this logistics person. I didn't just upheaval my day from the beginning. Like that's typically too big, too scary, unlikely to be successful. But in the beginning, figure out what the smallest action you can take is in defiance of that committee member and try that and see if the world collapses around you. I bet it won't.
Right.
But just see what happens.
And I use the example in my practice of, all right, you know what? Let's say I was on the gymnastics team when I was in high school, and I was on the varsity team as a freshman. True story. And if I told you I could still do a standing double backflip, in fact, I can do it in my office. If I move some furniture out of the way, I can do it in my office as long as I'm not wearing heels. Do you believe me? And most people, if they're being honest, go ahead. Do you believe me, April?
I mean, I don't know. You said it really confidently. So I feel like I'm like, do it right now. I want to see.
Oh, so you jump ahead, right? Like to that, because usually people say like, I don't know, you're kind of old to do gymnastics. And I'm like, well, I've been practicing 20 years. And I'm like, well, it's kind of small in here. And I say, oh, I just took up an itty bitty ball. Are you convinced? And generally they'll say like you did, not really.
Yeah.
What would it take? Right? I'd have to prove it. You'd have to see it.
Yeah.
And that's how I see dealing with the committee is you can try to argue with them and they're going to have a response back most of the time. So ultimately we say, oh yeah, prove it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it helps to think of it that way instead of experiments, do it, right? But prove it.
Mm-hmm.
And another way to get sassy or defiant, because not all of the committee members really lend themselves quite as well to this experimentation or to this proving it, but you can still defy them. Like let's take the persecutor who says, well, that person's an idiot because they did it a different way. All right, well, could you defy the persecutor and instead of yelling or insulting that person, could you go with the flow? Could you do it their way? Could you be kind to them instead of mean? So some of it is you can think of it as doing the opposite. So if your committee says go left, go right, sit down, stand up. Be a jerk, be nice. Be nice, be mean. So there are some ways to defy it there. Yeah. And as long as we're thought minus action is going to decrease that thought.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Ashley mentioned that this is a big section of the Ascend program. We go through a description of who these committee members are, but then we work with them throughout the remainder of the program. So not only in the Your Mind section, we give you a ton of evidence-based techniques that you can use to shift your relationship with these committee members, to get them more in check, to recognize them more quickly, to really see and pinpoint the impact that really what does the taskmaster do to your bodily sensations, to your action urges? What do they do to your feelings and your emotions? What do those linkages look like? We really dive into that to make you much savvier and quicker at seeing it. But then in the third section of the program, so it's you, your mind, your life, right? Mm-hmm. In the third section of the program where we do all life design, guess who gets loud when you start, ripping things apart in your life? The committee gets so loud. And so by that point, if you've ever tried to make changes in your life, habit changes in a job, relationship, like that type of thing, your committee gets so loud. And by the time you reach that point in the Ascend program, you've had so much practice identifying and checking those committee members that you're so much more likely to be successful with life changes because you're ready for the judge. You're ready for the persecutor. You're ready for the critic. You're ready for the people pleaser. Like you see them coming and you're like, you know what? I'm going to start messing with this stuff at my job. Hey, martyr, I'm waiting for you. Where are you at? You're going to come at me and I'm ready for you. And I've already thought about what I'm going to do to quiet you. So we had to mention that bit about our program. We're going to put a little bit more information at the end of this episode about the program. We also, before we go, what I want you to just remember, next week, we're going to release part 2 of this series. There is a set of committee members that are so powerful, so helpful, so valuable, but they need to be invited. So we're going to go through who they are, give you a little information about where they come from and how you can invite them to the table. And it's just going to be a much needed flip side to this conversation, because there's so much in you that is so valuable. You just need to know how to access that.
Exactly.
Any final thoughts?
No, that sounds good. I'm ready for the next part.
Awesome. Alrighty. So we will post some information coming up here in just a moment about the Ascend program. We'll throw a link in the episode description if you're interested in learning more. We would love to see you there. Next live call is coming up. We're so excited. So go forth, pay attention to your committee members, call them out, defy, and we'll see you next week. And we'll talk about the more helpful committee members that you have to invite to the table.
Can't wait.
Tell me if this sounds like you. I'll finally be happy. I'll finally take a breath. I'll finally find some balance when I get through this crazy season of life. We hear that from so many people, and the fact is, many times, life is just a crazy season. All of it. Between your career, your family, your community obligations, attempting to have a social life, and trying to fit in self-care, whatever that is, we end up feeling stretched so thin. Now, I want to challenge you to think about things differently. Rather than focusing on external circumstances and their impact on your happiness, your sense of ease and balance, and your mental well-being, what if, instead, you focused on something you can actually control? What if you built the psychological strength that would allow you to thrive through life when things are going well and even when they're not? What if you could feel less scattered, more in control, less anxious, more peaceful and joyful? We want that for you too. That's why we are so beyond excited to announce the beta release of our signature Psych Strength Building program, Ascend. This program combines evidence-based tools, techniques, and information from the fields of psychology and life design to focus on 3 important modules: you, your mind, and your life. Learn your unique combination of strengths, values, and identity, and the ways in which they interact and lead you to approach life in your unique way. Dig into your mind to understand the conscious and subconscious processes that act as a lens through which you experience life. And finally, harness the power of life design to begin to steer your life into alignment with who you uniquely are. Enrollment in this beta round of Ascend is open now, and because it's our beta round, the price is astonishingly low. So if you have ever had even a suspicion that you could benefit from building psychological strength through a guided, science-backed experience, now is the time. Visit www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend for more information and to join us. Friends, it is time to build psychological strength. It's time to live by design and not by default. It is time to live like your life depends on it, because it does. Join us in Ascend by visiting www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. That's www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so. But today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.